He came home early, and what he found in the living room changed everything. Watch till the end, and if it moves you, give it a like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. The sun over Los Angeles had barely risen when Logan Mitchell stepped out of the backseat of a taxi, holding nothing but a slim white briefcase and a faded pink teddy bear. His usual motorcade and security team were nowhere in sight. The estate gates had opened by remote access from his phone, and now he stood quietly in front of his palatial Beverly Hills mansion, jet-lagged and running on instinct alone. He hadn't planned to come home. He was supposed to be in Dubai, shaking hands with billionaires and giving keynote speeches at the Global Finance Forum. But when the final session ended earlier than expected, and applause faded into the sterile quiet of a private executive lounge, Logan felt a pang in his chest he couldn't ignore. The money, the accolades, none of it meant anything if it meant being away from Madison. His 5-year-old daughter, the only light that had kept him going since her mother's death last year. He hadn't seen her in over a week, and for the last 3 days, her voice on the phone had sounded distant, too quiet. She used to giggle during their bedtime calls, tell him about school and dance class. Lately, she just whispered, "Good night," and hung up before he could ask anything real. So he boarded a red-eye flight, no entourage, no announcement. He didn't even tell his assistant. He wanted this moment to be just for them, a surprise visit, a reunion. He would walk through the door, find her playing in the sunroom, and wrap her in his arms. She'd shriek with joy. He'd lift her up and tell her that Daddy came home just for her. But as he opened the front door, something felt wrong. The scent of lemon polish and linen candles floated through the air, same as always. But the house felt too quiet. His footsteps echoed on the marble floor as he stepped inside. No cartoons from the living room, no clatter of toys, no soft humming from the kitchen. It was a silence that wrapped around him like a warning. Still, he smiled to himself. Maybe she was upstairs, still asleep. He adjusted his blazer, tightened his grip on the teddy bear, and moved toward the heart of the house. But when he turned the corner into the living room, the world dropped out from under him. There she was, Diane Whitmore, the housekeeper he had trusted for nearly a year, stood stiffly by the velvet armchair. Her black and white uniform was pressed, apron cinched, hair tightly pinned. In her arms, limp and motionless, was Madison. Logan froze. His breath caught in his throat. Madison's face was buried in Diane's shoulder. One cheek was swollen and purple. Her eye was puffed shut, her lip cracked open. Her tiny arm hung lifelessly, and her legs dangled with no resistance. He dropped the briefcase. The teddy bear hit the floor with a soft thud. "What the hell?" he whispered. Diane looked up, her expression unreadable, calm, cold, almost annoyed. "She fell again," she said flatly. Logan didn't move. The words didn't compute. Fell? Again? He stepped forward slowly, his heartbeat crashing in his ears. "Madison?" She didn't respond. Didn't even lift her head. He lunged forward, nearly yanking her from Diane's grip. His daughter whimpered as he cradled her against his chest. Her small body flinched with every breath. "Sweetheart?" His voice cracked. "What happened to you?" Madison buried her face in his chest, her fingers clutching weakly at his shirt. She didn't answer. She just let out another soft, painful whimper. He looked up, eyes blazing. "What did you do to her?" Diane crossed her arms. "She's always been clumsy. You know that. She tripped on the stairs." Logan stared at her like she was speaking another language. His hands trembled. He could feel every sharp twitch of Madison's ribs as she breathed. He could feel the blood from her lip on his collar. He fumbled for his phone. "I'm calling 911. Diane didn't move, didn't argue, just stood there silent. "Emergency services. What's your location?" "This is Logan Mitchell. My daughter's been injured. She's 5 years old. Facial trauma, possibly broken ribs. We need an ambulance at 1248 Crestline Drive, Beverly Hills. Now." As he ended the call, he turned and headed for the front door, Madison still in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes fluttering. "Stay with me, Peanut. I'm here." Sirens screamed down the street within minutes. Paramedics rushed inside, bringing in stretchers and kits. One EMT gently took Madison from Logan's arms, his hands moving quickly but carefully. "This doesn't look accidental," the medic said under his breath. Logan's jaw clenched. It wasn't. Diane stood by the wall, arms crossed, her face blank. One of the officers pulled Logan aside. "Sir, do you suspect abuse?" "She didn't fall," Logan said, voice shaking. "That woman hurt my daughter." The officer nodded and signaled to his partner, who moved toward Diane. "She screams when she doesn't get her way," Diane said calmly. "Sometimes a child needs discipline." The words made Logan's blood run cold. "You hit her?" "I gave her structure," Diane replied. "You left her in a world of toys and tantrums. I gave her rules." Logan took a step forward, fist tightening, but the officer placed a hand on his chest. "Let us handle her, sir." Diane was escorted into the next room, where officers began their questioning. Logan didn't look back. He sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, staring at his blood-stained shirt, his hands still trembling. The weight of it all pressed down on him like a mountain. She fell again. He remembered Madison weeks ago pointing at a bruise on her leg. "Miss Diane said I was too slow." He'd thought it was just playground talk. He hadn't asked more questions. Now he understood. Every silence, every short phone call, every missed giggle. He had trusted this woman, and now his baby girl was broken in his arms. The ambulance lights blinked outside. Paramedics gently loaded Madison onto a stretcher. As they lifted her, her tiny hand reached out toward him. He rushed to her side, grabbing her fingers. "Daddy's right here. I'm not going anywhere." Madison opened her mouth. Just one word came out. "Hurts." Logan's throat closed. Tears spilled down his cheeks as he kissed her forehead. "I know, baby. I know. But it's over now." He watched as they carried her out of the house, lights flashing red against the marble floors. The teddy bear still lying face down near the couch. Logan stood motionless in the doorway, the sunlight casting long shadows behind him. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hospital lights hummed overhead, a constant low drone that merged with the chaos inside Logan Mitchell's mind. It had been 12 hours since Madison was admitted. 12 hours of pacing cold hallways, speaking to a rotation of specialists, and replaying the image of her bruised little face over and over again until it etched itself behind his eyelids. He sat now in a vinyl hospital chair, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, dressed in an old hoodie and jeans someone from his security detail had brought from home. His pristine white suit, the one he had worn straight off the plane, was now sealed in a biohazard bag. Bloodstains, tears, regret. He never wanted to see it again. Through the glass window beside him, Madison lay curled in a hospital bed, her small body swaddled in a blanket covered in cartoon giraffes. Her face was still puffy, one eye swollen shut, a thin IV line threaded into the back of her hand. She hadn't spoken since she whispered that one word, "hurts," before slipping into a light sleep. But the doctors had spoken plenty. 2 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, bruising across her back and thighs in various stages of healing. A split lip that required 4 stitches. These weren't new injuries. At least some of them had occurred days, if not weeks, earlier. This wasn't one fall, the pediatric trauma specialist had said, gently but firmly. This is a pattern. Logan had nodded, jaw locked. He already knew it. But hearing it out loud tore something loose in him. He rose from the chair and walked into the private hospital room. He sat beside her bed, taking her small hand in his. Her skin was warm, fragile. Her fingers were still, no fidgeting, no twirling her braids like she used to. Just quiet, like she had turned her voice off. "I'm so sorry, Peanut," he whispered. "I should have seen it. I should have known." But he hadn't. That was the part that haunted him. There had been signs, not big ones, not enough to raise alarms, but they were there. Little shifts. Madison used to talk his ear off on video calls, chattering about her stuffed animals and her favorite cereal. Lately, their conversations had been shorter. She'd stared at the floor more. When he asked her about school, she shrugged. When he asked if she was happy, she said yes, without looking at him. He chalked it up to grief. Her mother had passed less than a year ago. Brain aneurysm, sudden, cruel. Madison had been too young to fully grasp it, but the loss had left a mark. That's what the therapist said. That's what Diane had echoed. She's acting out, she'd explained, withdrawn, moody. It's all part of the process. And Logan had believed her. That was the part that burned. He had trusted Diane Whitmore, a woman with a glowing resume, letters of recommendation, and a calm demeanor. She spoke with authority, kept the house spotless, and never raised her voice. She had even attended church. When Madison acted out, Diane said she was providing discipline, boundaries, structure. Logan had nodded and told himself he was doing the right thing. Now he could see the truth in hindsight. Madison hadn't been misbehaving. She'd been crying for help, and no one had listened. He turned as the door opened, quietly. Officer Ramirez stepped in, a plainclothes detective assigned to the case. "Mr. Mitchell," she said gently, "may I sit?" Logan nodded, not letting go of Madison's hand. "We've arrested Diane Whitmore. She's being held pending charges of felony child abuse. Based on the medical reports in your statement, the case is strong. But I have to ask, do you want to pursue this as far as it can go?" Logan looked at her sharply. "I want every stone turned over, every shadow exposed. I want to know who this woman really is." Ramirez nodded. "Understood. We're already looking into her employment history, but if you want to expedite things, hiring a private investigator wouldn't hurt." "I already have," Logan said, "and I've got my legal team working around the clock." Ramirez gave a slight smile. "That'll help. Sometimes these things get buried. Not every parent wants to go through the court system." Logan's eyes narrowed. "You mean there were others?" The detective hesitated. "Off the record, we've received a couple of quiet calls since the arrest. Families who recognized her face on the news. Nothing ever officially filed. But they're starting to talk." Logan clenched his jaw. "Get me their names. I want to speak with them." "I can't legally share that information, but your investigator might have more flexibility." She rose, giving Madison one last glance. "She's lucky to have you." "No," Logan murmured. "I'm lucky she's still alive." 2 days later, Logan sat in a glass-walled office downtown across from his private investigator, Mark Langley, a sharp, no-nonsense former federal agent. On the table between them was a manila folder filled with names, dates, and documented incidents that had never made it to court. 7 families, Mark said, all with similar stories. Hired Diane Whitmore, fired her quietly. Most suspected something, but they didn't want the drama. Some chalked it up to strict parenting. Others just wanted her gone. None filed formal reports. Logan's fist slammed the table. She was passed around like used furniture, and no one warned the next family? Mark opened the file and flipped to a printed email. One mother wrote this: "We let her go because we didn't like the way she grabbed our son's arm. Too tight. He cried. But we thought maybe we were being too sensitive. We didn't want to ruin her reputation." Another letter read, "We found our daughter locked in a pantry for over an hour after refusing to eat. Diane said it was time out." Logan stood, pacing the room. They were scared of making waves, of being seen as difficult. And because of that, Madison, he couldn't finish. Mark closed the file. "You're not the first person she fooled, but you can be the last." Logan nodded slowly. "No," he said. "She won't hurt another child. Ever." Back at the hospital, Madison stirred as Logan returned to her room. Her good eye fluttered open. She smiled faintly when she saw him. "Daddy," she rasped. Logan rushed to her side, tears welling again. "Hey, Peanut, I'm here." She squeezed his finger weakly. "I had a dream," she whispered. "Yeah, what was it?" "You were home, not in a computer, not on the phone." Logan's voice cracked. "Well, it wasn't a dream this time." She smiled and drifted back to sleep. He sat beside her in silence, but inside, something had changed. This wasn't just about justice. It was about every child who had been told their pain was just clumsiness, every parent who had dismissed a bruise, every silent cry ignored. Logan wouldn't just fix this. He would burn the whole system down and rebuild it from scratch. Because silence wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. The courthouse stood tall and austere under the gray morning sky, its stone facade casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. Logan Mitchell exited his car in silence. There was no press conference, no statement. He wore a navy suit, not designer, but clean and crisp. The world would see him not as a billionaire today, but as a father. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, just a folded piece of paper in his inside pocket, one he had written late last night, sitting by Madison's hospital bed as she slept. The case had moved quickly, expedited by overwhelming evidence, medical records, eyewitness statements, and a detective who made it clear she wouldn't tolerate leniency. Diane Whitmore had been charged with felony child abuse and unlawful restraint, and after Logan's private team turned over the information they'd uncovered, the district attorney added 3 more charges, based on the reopened complaints from previous families. Now Diane sat at the defendant's table, hands cuffed, orange jumpsuit wrinkled and loose on her frame. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her face wore the same cold, unreadable expression it always had. She looked out across the courtroom, but not once at Logan, and never at Madison. Logan sat just behind the prosecution, his fingers interlocked tightly in his lap. The courtroom was silent except for the rustling of papers and the low murmur of legal jargon. But he wasn't listening. His eyes never left Diane. When the judge finally called the room to order, the attorney stood, formalities were exchanged, and then came the words Logan had waited days to hear. "Mr. Mitchell, would you like to make a statement on behalf of the victim?" He rose. The room stilled. He stepped forward, every eye on him. Reporters scribbled behind closed courtroom doors. Courtroom staff held their breath. The bailiff didn't move. He reached the podium, took a breath, and unfolded the paper, but then lowered it. His voice didn't need notes. "My name is Logan Mitchell," he began, his tone calm but strained. "And I'm here today not as a CEO or public figure. I'm here as Madison's father." He paused. "She's 5. She still sleeps with the nightlight on. She still asks me to read the same book 4 times in a row. And last week, I found her body bruised and broken in the arms of the woman I trusted most inside our home." He looked at Diane now. She didn't blink. "I hired her after my wife died. Madison needed stability. I needed someone who would love and protect her while I was working to build our future. I didn't just give this woman a job. I gave her access to my world, my home, my daughter." He gripped the edge of the podium. "And what did she do with that trust? She hurt my child. She silenced her with fear. She used discipline as an excuse for violence. She convinced me, a father desperate to do right, that my daughter's pain was just grief." He exhaled slowly, eyes beginning to glisten. "Let me be clear. I will carry the guilt of missing the signs for the rest of my life. But this isn't about me. This is about a child who lost her mother and nearly lost her voice." He turned toward the judge. "This woman used silence as her weapon. She chose a child who didn't know how to fight back. She gambled that no one would believe a little girl who still sleeps with teddy bears." Now he turned back to Diane. "But you made one mistake. You didn't count on me coming home." For the first time, something flickered in Diane's expression. A twitch of the mouth, a shift in her jaw. Logan continued. "You didn't count on me walking through that door and seeing what you did. You didn't count on a father's rage or his reach. And you certainly didn't count on justice showing up in a suit instead of a badge." He stepped back. "I am not here for vengeance. I'm here for accountability, for every child you ever hurt, for every parent who stayed silent, and for Madison, who will heal because she's stronger than the woman who tried to break her." The judge nodded, voice measured. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell." As Logan returned to his seat, the prosecutor rose again, summarizing the charges and supporting evidence, medical records, testimony from past employers. A psychological profile showing manipulative behavior patterns masked as discipline. Then the judge turned to Diane. Miss Whitmore, you've been given the opportunity to speak. Do you have anything to say? Diane lifted her chin. Her voice was cold, detached. I did what I believed was necessary. That child was spoiled. She had no respect, no structure. I gave her what her father wouldn't. He coddled her. I taught her discipline. A wave of gas rippled through the courtroom. Logan's face hardened, but he didn't stand. The judge banged the gavel once, silencing the room. You mistook cruelty for guidance, Miss Whitmore, and you used your position to exert control over a defenseless child. This court does not tolerate that abuse of power. She turned to the clerk. On charges of felony child abuse, this court finds the defendant guilty. Sentence 12 years in a state correctional facility. No possibility of parole. There was no cheer, no applause, only silence. Diane was led out of the courtroom in shackles, her head held high. But her silence, finally, meant nothing. It had no more power here. Logan remained seated, breathing for what felt like the first time in days. The weight hadn't lifted, not completely, but it had shifted. It was no longer a fog of helplessness. It was focus, clarity, purpose. Outside the courthouse, reporters called out his name. Flashes went off, questions rained down. But Logan didn't speak. He got into the car and closed the door, shutting out the noise. Madison was waiting. When he stepped back into the hospital room later that day, she was awake, sitting up with a coloring book in her lap. She looked up, eyes still tired but brighter than they'd been. Hi, Daddy. He smiled, walking over to her. Hi, Peanut. She held up a page she'd been coloring. It was a house with two stick figures holding hands outside. One big, one small. The big one had a suit and a smile. That's us, she said proudly. Logan knelt beside her, voice catching. That's beautiful. She looked at him curiously. Did you stop the mean lady? He nodded. I did. Will she come back? No, he said firmly. Never. Madison leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Logan let himself believe it. They were safe, but safety wasn't enough. Not yet. The mansion on Crestline Drive no longer felt like home. Even after the trial. Even after justice had been delivered, and Diane Whitmore sentenced to 12 years behind bars, Logan Mitchell returned to a house that had become a hollow monument. A shrine to a life before everything shattered. The marble floors still gleamed. The scent of lemon polish and linen candles still drifted faintly through the air. The walls were still lined with fine art, custom frames, and minimalist elegance. But it was Madison's silence that had left the deepest echo in every room. Her playroom remained untouched. Dolls lined the shelves. Stuffed animals waited in corners. Puzzles half-finished on the floor. And next to the fridge, taped between photos and takeout menus, was the same sticker chart Diane had once turned into a tool of cruelty. Each missing gold star, each red X, a reminder of pain passed off as parenting. But now, things were changing. Slowly. Madison had come home from the hospital 2 weeks ago. The doctors said she was healing well, physically. The dislocated shoulder was in a sling, her ribs protected by careful movement. The bruises were fading, and the stitches in her lip had been removed. But the emotional wounds, they whispered in quieter ways. She clung to Logan like he might vanish. If he left a room, she followed. If he stepped outside, she pressed her face to the window. And he didn't resist it. Not once. Because the truth was, he needed her just as much. He had turned down all meetings, all investor calls, all board appearances. Madison was his only priority now. They had started a new routine. Breakfast together at the counter, reading sessions in the library, long walks in the garden, coloring on the living room floor. Sometimes she asked about her mother. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and Logan listened, even to the silence. One afternoon, she walked into his study holding a purple crayon in her hand. Daddy, she said softly, draw with me. He closed his laptop immediately, knelt beside her on the rug, and took the crayon. What should I draw? She thought for a moment. Draw me, she said, but happy this time. Logan felt his chest tighten. He nodded, smiled, and began to draw a little girl with braids and a bright sun above her head. That night, he sat alone in his office after Madison had fallen asleep. He opened his laptop, not for work, but for purpose. He pulled up the first draft of a document he'd been working on silently for days, the Madison Hope Initiative, a nonprofit foundation built with one goal: to protect children from the dangers that lurk in plain sight, inside homes, behind smiling resumes, beneath the surface of well-manicured help. He poured millions into its launch. The program offered free surprise inspections of caregivers, anonymous tip hotlines for suspected abuse, and subsidized background checks for low-income families hiring in-home staff. He partnered with therapists, child psychologists, legal advocates, and eventually with state lawmakers. Within weeks, he stood beside State Senator Valerie Knox on the steps of the Capitol building. "We must face the uncomfortable truth," Logan told the cameras. "There are thousands of families like mine, busy parents doing their best, unknowingly, entrusting their children to the wrong hands. The Madison Hope Initiative will change that. It will give children a voice, one that cannot be ignored." It made headlines, not because of his wealth, but because of his sincerity. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about change. A month later, Logan sat with Madison at the kitchen table. She was giggling now. Real laughter. Not loud, but genuine. Her coloring book was full. Her appetite had returned. She spoke more confidently, slept more soundly. They were healing. That evening, Logan pulled a large canvas from the closet. He hadn't painted in years. Not since college, not since long before the boardrooms and skyscrapers. But that night, he painted. He painted a child standing tall in a field of color, eyes bright, head high. Behind her stood a silhouette of a man, arms wide, gaze proud, and above them, 3 simple words: "I heard you." He hung it in the hallway Madison walked through every morning. 6 months passed. The initiative had expanded statewide. Diane's past victims, once silent, had come forward publicly. And in response, new legislation was signed into law requiring mandatory caregiver certifications and quarterly check-ins for all domestic child care workers in California. Other states were watching, but Logan didn't track the metrics. He didn't sit in conference rooms or read quarterly reports. He was on the floor helping Madison build Lego castles and string beads into bracelets. He was in the backyard, teaching her to ride a scooter again, slowly, carefully, with training wheels. He was at the school drop-off line, holding her hand, kissing her forehead before she stepped out of the car. He was there, and that was everything. One morning, as they sat on the porch eating cereal, Madison looked up at him and said, "Daddy?" "Yes, Peanut? I don't have bad dreams anymore." Logan smiled. "That's good." She took a spoonful of cereal, then looked up again. "It's because you're here, and because I talk now." He blinked. "You've always talked." She shook her head. "I mean, I really talk. When things feel wrong, when I feel scared. I don't keep it in anymore." She paused. "That's what you told me to do. And it works." Logan felt a tear slip down his cheek. He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm proud of you." She smiled. "I'm proud of me too." In that moment, Logan Mitchell knew that his daughter's voice, the one someone once tried to silence, had become stronger than ever. And now the world was listening. Her voice was almost taken, but now the world listens. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from?